So that was Android, Emulator, and the real device. Now what about iOS? Now important, to build an iOS app, you need the macOS operating system. That is a restriction applied by Apple. You can't build your Flutter app for iOS on Windows or Linux. You need macOS. If you are on macOS, then you can of course also test the app on a simulator or also on a real device. Now for that, you need Xcode, and I showed you how to install Xcode in the first module of this course, so you should be able to launch Xcode and see that welcome screen there. Now in there, open another project, click that button, and then navigate to your Flutter project folder, and there to the iOS folder and choose that runner Xcode project file. Open that as a project in Xcode. Now here you could write code, but that's not what we'll do. We'll stick to Visual Studio Code for that. But here we can also configure this so that we can run it on a simulator. And there's one important thing you need to set up. Click on this project icon here, or on this root icon here, this root element in the left bar here, where you can get by clicking this folder icon here. So click on that so that you have this view. And then here you might see that signing for runner requires a development team. For that here in this drop-down, you should choose a team, and normally you should have one. If you don't have a team here, click on add an account and add your Apple account with your Apple ID here to Xcode. So here you can either create a new one if you don't have one, or you log in with an existing account. Now, important, for developing iOS apps, you need an Apple developer account, and you can activate one for your Apple ID, which you probably already have, by going to developer.apple.com and there click on account. Now here you now have to log in with your Apple ID, and a process should start which turns you into an Apple developer. Whilst you need to agree to some terms, what you don't need to do to develop apps is pay. You will have to pay a fee to really publish your app to the Apple App Store, but for developing and testing your app, you don't need a paid account. So no need to pay, you just need a normal Apple developer account. Once you have that, you should be able to select your team here in Xcode and use that for this project. Now once you did this once, you should be fine. And now you can run your project either through Xcode by selecting a simulator here and clicking the run button, or select a real connected device if you have one. But you can also do it here from within Visual Studio Code by going to the terminal, and there in your normal system terminal, you can run open -a simulator.app. And what this will do is it will bring up an iOS simulator. Here it is. Let me close Xcode. We don't need that anymore. Let me move the Android simulator over there. And now here is the iOS simulator. And again, you could have launched that through Xcode as well if you wanted to. Now this is booting up, and as soon as this simulator is done booting up, we can select it down here. Oh, well, actually I can already do that. So you can select your simulator here in the bottom right corner of Visual Studio Code by clicking on that bar here, then select the iOS device, or as before, shut down all other simulators, disconnect all other devices from your machine, and it should automatically pick this one. And once you did all of that, just as before, you can again run your app there with the Flutter run command or through the debug menu here in Visual Studio Code and start without debugging, for example. And now this will also build the app, but it will now build it with the help of Xcode, because now an iOS app is built, and once it's done building the app, it will ship it onto the simulator. So let's wait for that to finish. Here's the app running on iOS now, and one thing you might notice is that it looks exactly the same as it looks on an Android device. The reason for that is that Flutter does not automatically adjust the styles to the iOS look. It does not automatically give you that iOS look. Remember that with Flutter, you in the end use a framework that controls every pixel. It's not using native device or native platform user interface elements. So a button here is not compiled to an iOS button for iOS and to an Android button for Android. Instead, a button always looks the same because Flutter draws it onto the screen. It's not using some platform primitive, not a built-in UI element. And therefore, these apps look similar. Now, later in the course, you will indeed learn how to adjust your look though. Other than the font family is actually different automatically. But you will learn how you can adjust your app to look like an Android app on Android and an iOS app on iOS, if you want that. Or you create your own look for all platforms. Whatever you need. All that is possible with Flutter, and we'll of course have a look at all these options throughout the course. Now, more important than the look is, of course, that it works correctly. And that is the case here. So now we can also test the app here on the iOS simulator, and we're just fine. Everything is working correctly. Now, what about a real iOS device then?